The air in the private terminal was still, scrubbed clean of the usual chaos of commercial flight. For most, it was a sanctuary of silent efficiency. For Elias Vance, it was just another sterile room separating him from the city. He ran a hand over his tired face, the soft cotton of his gray hoodie a small comfort after the 11-hour flight from Seoul. He'd been in back-to-back meetings, hammering out the final details of a supply chain deal that would secure Nexus Innovations' hardware production for the next decade. Now, all that stood between him and a soft bed was a short ride to the Excelsior Grand Hotel. He traveled light. A single leather duffel bag held everything he needed for the 3-day trip. He preferred it that way, in a life of immense complexity. Managing a $20 billion tech company with interests in everything from cloud computing to artificial intelligence, simplicity was a luxury. That philosophy extended to his appearance. The hoodie, a pair of worn-in jeans, and comfortable sneakers were his uniform when he wasn't on a stage or in a boardroom. It kept him grounded. It also served as a useful filter, showing him how people reacted to the man, not the title. The ride to the hotel was a blur of rain, slicked streets, and neon lights. Elias looked out at the city, not as a conqueror, but as a student. He'd built Nexus from a 2-person startup in his garage into a global powerhouse by understanding systems code, logistics, markets, and most importantly, people. He believed that a company, a city, a society, it was all just a network of human interactions. The health of the system depended on the quality of those interactions. When the car pulled up to the gleaming portico of the Excelsior Grand, a doorman in a ridiculously ornate coat gave his car a cursory glance before turning his attention to the polished black sedan that pulled in behind him. Elias didn't mind. He grabbed his own bag from the trunk, gave his driver a nod, and walked into the lobby. The inside of the Excelsior Grand was a cathedral of wealth. A colossal crystal chandelier hung from a frescoed ceiling, spilling light onto acres of marble flooring. The air smelled faintly of lilies and money. People glided rather than walked, their conversations a low, confident hum. Elias absorbed the atmosphere, feeling the familiar sense of detachment he always felt in such places. They were beautiful but hollow, built to impress rather than to welcome. He approached the long, polished check-in counter. 2 clerks were on duty, both dressed in sharp, dark suits. They were busy with a family dripping in designer logos. Elias waited patiently, standing a few feet back to give them space. He checked a few non-urgent emails on his phone, his posture relaxed. After several minutes, one of the clerks, a young woman with a practiced smile, finally acknowledged him. "Can I help you, sir?" she asked, her eyes flicking from his hoodie to his sneakers with an almost imperceptible dip in her smile. "Checking in," Elias said, his voice calm and a little wary from travel. "The name is Vance. Elias Vance." She typed the name into her terminal. Her fingers paused. "Yes, the presidential suite for 3 nights." The way she said it wasn't a confirmation but a question. It was as if the computer had presented her with an error message. She looked back at him, her professional mask slipping into one of polite confusion. Before she could continue, a man emerged from a back office. He was older, with slicked back gray hair and a pinched expression that seemed to be his face's default setting. A small gold-plated name tag read Alistair Finch, night manager. Finch walked directly to the clerk, ignoring Elias completely. "Is there a problem, Amelia?" he asked, his tone crisp and condescending. "No, Mr. Finch," she said quickly, composing herself. "This gentleman is checking into the presidential suite." Finch finally turned his gaze on Elias. It wasn't a glance, it was an appraisal. He took in the simple clothes, the unassuming demeanor, and the color of his skin. The conclusion he reached was immediate and absolute. He offered a smile that was all teeth and no warmth. "Good evening, sir," Finch said, stepping in front of Amelia and taking over the keyboard. "The presidential suite is our finest accommodation. We naturally have a few procedural formalities for such a booking. I'm sure you understand." Elias understood perfectly. He had seen this exact scenario play out dozens of times in his life, in countless variations. It was the quiet, systemic assumption that he didn't belong. "I'm sure you do," Elias replied evenly, meeting the manager's gaze without aggression, but with a firmness that went unnoticed. Finch's smile tightened. "Of course, we will require pre-payment for the full stay plus a security deposit. Hotel policy." It wasn't policy. Elias had stayed in hundreds of high-end hotels. This was a custom-made obstacle designed for him. He felt a familiar, cold weight settle in his gut. Not anger, but profound disappointment. The system wasn't just broken, it was actively hostile. And here, in this palace of marble and light, the system had a name: Alistair Finch. "That won't be a problem," Elias said, his mind already shifting from the wary traveler to the CEO. The gears were turning. A problem had been identified, and problems, in Elias Vance's world, were meant to be solved. The air in the lobby grew thicker, with unspoken tension. Alistair Finch tapped a few keys on his terminal with an air of theatrical importance, the clicking sound echoing in the quiet space. Amelia, the younger clerk, had retreated a step, busying herself with paperwork that didn't seem to exist, her discomfort palpable. "Right then," Finch announced, turning the monitor slightly so Elias could see the exorbitant figure. "That will be the total for your 3-night stay, plus the standard security hold." Elias didn't even glance at the number. He reached into the pocket of his jeans and pulled out his wallet. He bypassed the several other high-limit cards and selected the one he used for major corporate expenses. It was a sleek, heavy card, forged from anodized titanium. Its official name was the American Express Centurion card, but the world knew it by another name: the Black Card. It had no pre-set spending limit. It was a symbol, a key that unlocked doors. Tonight, however, it was apparently a red flag. He placed the card on the marble counter. Finch stared at the card. He didn't pick it up. A slow, incredulous smile spread across his face, a mask of pure condescension. He looked up at Elias, then back at the card, and then he let out a short, sharp laugh. It wasn't a belly laugh, it was a scoff, a sound of dismissal designed to humiliate. "Sir," Finch said, his voice dripping with mock politeness, "while I appreciate the enthusiasm, we can only accept legitimate forms of payment." He pushed the card back across the counter with his index finger, as if it were contaminated. "Perhaps a more conventional credit card. A Visa or a standard American Express, maybe." The implication was brutally clear. A man who looked like Elias couldn't possibly be the rightful owner of such a card. It had to be fake or stolen. The insult was so brazen, so unapologetically racist, that it momentarily stunned the air out of the lobby. Another guest, a woman in a fur coat waiting for the elevator, glanced over, her expression a mixture of curiosity and disdain. Elias felt a cold calm wash over him. The wariness was gone, replaced by a crystalline focus. He wasn't angry. Anger was a messy emotion, unproductive. What he felt was a deep structural disappointment. This wasn't just one prejudiced man. This was a symptom of a diseased culture, a rot that festered in places that prized image over integrity. He looked at Finch, his eyes steady. "That card is legitimate," he said, his voice quiet but carrying an undeniable weight. "It is my primary corporate account." Finch's smirk widened. "Of course it is, and I am the King of England." He leaned forward, lowering his voice into a conspiratorial whisper. "Look, son, I don't know what kind of game you're playing, but this is the Excelsior Grand. We have a certain clientele, a certain standard. Why don't you save us both the embarrassment and just show me a real card so you can be on your way?" The word "osan" hung in the air, a final, patronizing nail. Elias slowly retracted the Centurion card and put it back in his wallet. He knew that arguing would be pointless. He was not dealing with a reasonable man. He was dealing with a gatekeeper, a petty tyrant whose power was derived from enforcing a flawed and prejudiced system. Trying to convince him of his error would be like trying to teach a rock to fly. You don't argue with the rock, you simply find a way around it, or, if necessary, you remove it. Without another word, Elias took out a different card, a standard, personal use platinum card, and handed it to Finch. Finch took it with a triumphant sniff, swiped it through the machine, and grunted when it was approved without issue. "There now," he said, as if praising a child who had finally learned to behave. "Was that so difficult?" He slid the keycard and a receipt across the counter. "The presidential suite is on the 48th floor. The private elevator is to your right. Enjoy your stay." Elias took the keycard. He held Finch's gaze for a long moment. "Tell me, Mr. Finch," he said, his tone purely informational. "For my records, could you please spell your full name and confirm your official title here?" Finch puffed out his chest, mistaking the request for a sign of intimidation. "Certainly, it's Alistair, Alistair Finch, Finch. I am the night manager of this establishment." "Thank you, Alistair," Elias said, the use of his first name a subtle, precise strike. He turned and walked toward the elevator, his duffel bag feeling weightless in his hand. Once inside the silent, ascending elevator, he pulled out his phone. He didn't call his security team. He didn't call his legal department. He opened a secure messaging app and sent a single, encrypted line to one person in the world he trusted implicitly with the operational heart of his company. The recipient was Amina Reyes, his chief operating officer. The message was simple, yet it carried the weight of 1,000 decisions. "Amina, run a full diagnostic on Croft Enterprises' hospitality division. I want to see everything: customer satisfaction, HR complaints, management response patterns. Everything." He pressed send just as the elevator doors opened to his suite. The message was delivered. The first gear of a multi-billion-dollar machine had just been engaged. Mr. Finch thought he had won a small victory, enforcing the standards of his little kingdom. He had no idea he had just triggered an earthquake. It was 10:17 p.m. in New York, but for Amina Reyes the time was irrelevant. Her office, on the 60th floor of the Nexus Tower, offered a panoramic view of a city that never slept, a view she shared. As Chief Operating Officer, she was the central nervous system of Nexus Innovations, the one who translated Elias Vance's visionary, often cryptic, directives into actionable, global strategy. Her desk was a clean, organized expanse, dominated by 3 monitors displaying real-time data from every corner of their empire. Her phone buzzed with the unique, muted tone she reserved for Elias. She glanced at the message. Amina, run a full diagnostic on Croft Enterprises' hospitality division. I want to see everything. Customer satisfaction, HR complaints, management response patterns. Everything. Amina's focus sharpened instantly. This was not a standard request. Elias was in the city to finalize the acquisition of Croft Enterprises, a $3.8 billion deal that would be the largest in Nexus history. They had already spent months on due diligence. The financials were solid. The market synergy was perfect. For him to ask for a diagnostic on a specific division now, with such urgency, meant something was fundamentally wrong. It wasn't a business query, it was a trouble call. She knew Elias. He never overreacted. His calm was legendary. For him to issue an order like this meant he had personally encountered an issue. A data point that their exhaustive research had somehow missed. All right, Elias, she murmured to the empty room. Let's see what you found. Amina didn't delegate. Not for a request like this. She swiveled in her chair, and her fingers flew across the keyboard. A blur of practiced efficiency. She already had top-level access to the Croft Enterprises data vaults as part of the ongoing merger process. But she wasn't looking at financials or asset reports. She was diving deeper into the unstructured, human-generated data that most analysts ignored. She started with the hospitality division, which operated under the brand name Excelsior Hotels and Resorts. First, she pulled up customer satisfaction metrics. On the surface, they looked acceptable, an average of 4.2 stars across most platforms. But Amina was trained to see patterns beneath the surface. She cross-referenced the scores with customer demographics. A disturbing picture began to emerge. Guests from non-traditional markets or with non-Anglo-Saxon surnames had a statistically significant lower satisfaction rate. Next, she accessed the raw customer feedback, the thousands of comments and complaints filed directly with Excelsior's corporate office. Using a Nexus developed data mining algorithm, she filtered the complaints by keywords discrimination, unfair, rude, profile insult. The results were chilling. Hundreds of incidents buried in a mountain of mundane complaints about room service or Wi-Fi. A black family accused of using a stolen credit card in Atlanta. A Latino couple being told the pool club was at capacity, while white couples were waved through in Miami. An Asian businessman being upgraded to a smaller room next to a noisy service elevator in London. The individual stories were infuriating, but the real damnation was in the metadata. Amina analyzed the management response to each of these specific complaints. The pattern was undeniable. Complaints about service quality were often resolved with apologies, vouchers, or refunds. But complaints related to discrimination were almost universally met with a template response. We have investigated the matter and found our staff acted in accordance with hotel policy. They weren't just isolated incidents. This was a system, a corporate policy of institutional denial. The culture didn't just allow prejudice, it protected it. Her hands paused on the keyboard. The final, critical piece of the puzzle: who owned Croft Enterprises? Whose leadership was responsible for this culture? The answer was already in her head, but she pulled up the file to confirm. Julian Croft, CEO, a man known for his aggressive profit at all costs business style. His memos, which she had reviewed during the initial due diligence, were filled with phrases like optimizing brand perception and managing reputational liabilities. Now, she understood the dark translation of that corporate speak. Make sure the right kind of people feel welcome and manage everyone else as a liability. The final connection clicked into place with the force of a physical blow. She pulled up Elias's travel itinerary. He was staying at the flagship hotel of the chain, the Excelsior Grand. "Oh, you fools," she whispered, a grim understanding dawning. "You have no idea who you just insulted." She compiled her findings into a concise, brutally efficient report. She attached charts showing the demographic disparities in satisfaction scores. She included a dozen of the most egregious complaints, verbatim. She highlighted the templated, dismissive responses from management, and at the very top, she wrote a single-line summary. "Elias, your instinct was correct. The flaw is not isolated. It is systemic and appears to be a feature of the division's corporate culture, designed to insulate the brand from discrimination claims. The entire hospitality division of Croft Enterprises is a moral and financial time bomb. This is not the company we thought it was." She attached the encrypted file and sent it. It was 1:34 a.m. In his suite on the 48th floor of the Excelsior Grand, Elias Vance, who had been sitting in a chair staring at the city lights, saw the notification. He opened the file. As he read, his calm expression didn't change, but a quiet, resolute hardness settled in his eyes. Amina had given him the data. He now had the evidence he needed. The problem wasn't a rogue manager. It was the entire foundation of the company he was supposed to acquire in less than 48 hours. The presidential suite was an exercise in sterile opulence. It was massive, with floor-to-ceiling windows, a grand piano no one played, and art on the walls that was chosen by a committee to be expensive but inoffensive. For Elias, it felt less like a home and more like a gilded cage. He had spent most of the night not sleeping, but absorbing Amina's report, letting the cold, hard data confirm the sickening feeling he'd had at the check-in counter. The next morning, he did not order room service. Instead, he put on the same hoodie and jeans from the day before and went down to the hotel's main cafe. He needed to see it for himself, to move through the system and observe it from the ground floor. Amina had given him the blueprint of the rot. Now he would trace its foundations. He took a small table in the corner and ordered a simple coffee. For an hour, he just watched. He was invisible, just another guest in a sea of guests. But he saw everything. He saw how the Mac Tray D seated a wealthy-looking white couple at a prime window table immediately, while telling a well-dressed black family they'd have to wait 20 minutes, despite several empty tables. He saw how a young Arab couple, asking for directions, were given short, clipped answers by a concierge who, moments later, spent 10 minutes fawning over an elderly European man. These were not grand acts of aggression. They were micro-injustices, the 1,000 tiny cuts that bleed a culture dry of its decency. Each one was deniable on its own. A table might have been reserved. The concierge might have been busy, but seen through the lens of Amina's data, the pattern was as clear as the crystal glasses on the tables. This was policy, unwritten but rigorously enforced. It was a culture of exclusion masquerading as exclusivity. Later that afternoon, he walked the hotel. He passed a conference room where a team was setting up for the next day's big event, the Nexus Croft merger signing. He saw the logo side by sighed on a welcome banner, and a wave of revulsion washed over him. The Nexus logo stood for innovation, connection, and human potential. The Croft logo, he now knew, stood for a polished, profitable lie. Returning to his suit, Elias opened his laptop and dove back into the master files for the acquisition. He wasn't looking at spreadsheets anymore. He was looking for the architect of the rot. He pulled up the internal profile on Julian Croft. Croft was a darling of Wall Street, turnaround artist, who took over his family's legacy hospitality company and made it brutally efficient. He'd slashed operational costs, optimized supply chains, and tripled the stock price. Elias read through Croft's internal memos, this time with a new understanding. A memo from 2 years ago praised anew risk management, software implemented across the hotel chain. On the surface, it was about streamlining complaint resolution, but Elias now saw its true purpose. The software flagged keywords associated with discrimination and automatically routed them into a separate queue where they were handled by a specialized legal team with the goal of mitigation, not resolution. It was a system designed to bury the truth, to protect the brand at the expense of human dignity. He found another memo, this one from Croft himself to his regional managers. The Excelsior brand is a luxury product. Like any luxury product, its value is tied to its aspirational quality. Every touchpoint, from our clientele to our staff, must reflect that singular standard. We must be vigilant custodians of the atmosphere we are selling. Custodians of the atmosphere. Elias leaned back in his chair. That was the phrase that codified the entire rotten philosophy. It was corporate speak for cultivating a specific, exclusionary environment. It was a quiet instruction to people like Alistair Finch to act as bouncers at the gates of wealth, ensuring the wrong. People were made to feel unwelcome. The problem wasn't a few bad employees, it was the CEO himself. Julian Croft hadn't just tolerated this culture, he had designed it. He had mistaken prejudice for luxury, and in doing so, had built his entire empire on a flawed foundation. The $3.8 billion valuation of Croft Enterprises was based on brand equity, on customer goodwill, on the promise of the Excelsior name. Elias now knew that brand was a hollow shell. Its value was a fiction. Acquiring it would be like knowingly building a skyscraper on quicksand. It wouldn't just be a bad financial decision, it would be a betrayal of everything Nexus Innovations stood for. It would infect his own company's culture. The decision crystallized in his mind, not with anger, but with absolute clarity. The deal could not happen. But he wouldn't just cancel it quietly. The rot had to be exposed. A lesson had to be taught, not just to Croft, but to the entire industry that celebrated his brand of soulless profitability. He sent a second message to Amina. It was even shorter than the first. Book the main ballroom at the Grand for a press conference tomorrow at noon. And Amina, I want you here. The stage was set. The investigation was complete. Tomorrow, in this very hotel, the foundation of Croft Enterprises would be brought down. The morning of the signing dawned gray and overcast, the sky mirroring the somber resolve that had settled over Elias Vance. He stood before the vast window of his suite, not looking at the view, but inward, steeling himself for the confrontation to come. He'd swapped the hoodie for one of his signature dark gray turtlenecks and a tailored black suit. Today, they would see the CEO. Downstairs, the Franklin Conference Center was buzzing with an electric, high-stakes energy. Lawyers in sharp suits whispered in huddled groups, clutching leather, bound document folders. Investment bankers, smelling the massive commission on the $3.8 billion deal, chatted amiably, their laughter echoing slightly too loud in the ornate room. At the center of it all was a long mahogany table, polished to a mirror shine. On one side were the seats for the Nexus team, on the other for Croft Enterprises. Julian Croft made his entrance like a conquering hero. He was tall, impeccably dressed, with a magnetic smile that he deployed like a strategic weapon. He moved through the room shaking hands, clapping backs, the picture of a man at the height of his power. He had no idea he was walking into an ambush. He saw Elias standing near the head of the table and strode over, his hand outstretched. "Elias, the man of the hour!" he boomed. "A historic day. Historic. I trust the Excelsior has treated you well." Elias met his handshake. It was firm, confident, and completely oblivious. "It's been an educational stay, Julian," Elias replied, his voice level and devoid of warmth. Croft, too wrapped up in his victory lap to notice the chill, just laughed. "Excellent! We aim to educate on the finer points of luxury. Please, let's sit. Let's make history." They took their seats. Amina Reyes sat to Elias's right. She had flown in on the company jet at dawn, her expression as calm and focused as his. She gave him a subtle, affirmative nod. Everything was ready. The lawyers began their procedural preamble, a droning recitation of clauses and conditions. Elias let the words wash over him. He watched Julian Croft across the table, who was idly scrolling through congratulatory messages on his phone, a smug smile playing on his lips. He was so sure of his success, so insulated by his wealth and privilege, that the possibility of failure had never entered his mind. Finally, the lead counsel for Nexus slid the final signature documents across the table to Elias. "Mr. Vance, if you would be so kind as to sign." All eyes in the room fell on him. The hushed chatter stopped. This was the moment, the culmination of months of work, of billions of dollars changing hands. Elias did not pick up the pen. He looked across the table at Julian Croft. "Before we proceed," he said, his voice cutting through the silence, "there is one final piece of due diligence I'd like to share." A flicker of confusion crossed Croft's face. "A bit late for that, isn't it, Elias? I think our teams have been quite thorough, but perhaps focused on the wrong things," Elias said. He nodded to Amina. Amina discreetly tapped a key on her tablet. The massive presentation screen behind the mahogany table, which had been displaying the Nexus and Croft logos, flickered to life. The first slide was a simple but devastating chart. It showed customer satisfaction scores at Excelsior hotels, starkly divided by demographic. The disparity was impossible to ignore. A confused murmur went through the room. Croft stared at the screen, his smile finally vanishing. "What is this?" he demanded. "This," Elias said, his voice rising in volume, commanding the attention of everyone present, "is the real culture of your company." The slide changed. It showed a verbatim complaint from the Atlanta hotel. "They accused my husband of trying to use a fake card and threatened to call the police. We were with our children. It was the most humiliating experience of our lives." The slide changed again. "A complaint from Miami. The manager told us the pool was for members only, but we watched him let 10 other white couples walk right in after us." Slide after slide, Amina projected the evidence of systemic rot, the buried HR complaints, the internal reports, the templated dismissive responses. With each slide, the color drained from Julian Croft's face. He was no longer looking at the screen, but staring at Elias, a mixture of fury and panic in his eyes. "This is absurd," Croft sputtered, finding his voice. "A handful of disgruntled customers? Every company has them." "It is not a handful, Julian. It's a pattern," Elias countered. "It's a culture you've built, a culture that mistakes prejudice for luxury." Then Amina put up the final slide. It was a still frame from a security camera, time-stamped 2 nights prior. It showed a clear shot of the Excelsior Grand's front desk. On one side of the counter was a man in a hoodie. On the other was a smirking, dismissive manager. The photo was of Elias and Mr. Alistair Finch. "I believe you know this man," Elias said calmly. "His name is Alistair Finch. He's your night manager. 2 nights ago, upon my arrival, he laughed at me for trying to use my corporate credit card. He called me son and suggested I was committing fraud because in his mind, and in the culture you have so carefully cultivated, a man who looks like me couldn't possibly belong here." A collective gasp went through the room. The lawyers looked at each other in horror. The bankers looked as if the floor had just vanished from beneath them. Elias stood up. This deal was contingent on the value of the Croft Enterprises brand. "This morning, I have learned that your brand is worthless. It is built on a foundation of bigotry and denial." He looked directly at Julian Croft, his voice cold as ice. "The deal is off." The words hung in the air, absolute and irrevocable. "The deal is off." For a moment, there was complete silence. The only sound was the faint hum of the room's air conditioning. The high-powered lawyers, bankers, and executives sat frozen, their minds struggling to process the magnitude of what had just happened. A $3.8 billion deal, one of the year's largest, had just been publicly executed in front of them. Julian Croft was the first to break the spell. He shot to his feet, his face a mask of purple fury. "You can't do that!" he roared, pointing a trembling finger at Elias. "We have a signed letter of intent. We have agreements. Our legal team will crucify you." Elias remained standing calm and unmoved by the outburst. "Your legal team is welcome to try Julian," he said, his voice cutting through Croft's rage. "They can explain to a judge why Croft Enterprises has a documented history of discriminatory practices. They can explain the risk management software designed to bury those claims. And they can explain why your company's culture is so toxic that it insults and humiliates a potential business partner before he even signs the paperwork. Our contract has a material adverse change clause. And I consider discovering that your entire brand is built on a morally bankrupt foundation to be a rather material change." Panic began to ripple through the Croft side of the table. Their lead counsel was frantically whispering to his team, their faces pale. They knew Elias was right. The public nature of the revelation was a disaster from which there was no recovery. In a desperate, flailing attempt to regain control, Croft spun around to one of his aides. "Get Finch. Get Alistair Finch up here right now," he bellowed. It was a pathetic, transparent move, a public sacrifice to appease the man he could no longer control. A few minutes later, a bewildered Alistair Finch was escorted into the conference room. He was still in his sharp manager's uniform, but his usual smugness was gone, replaced by a nervous confusion. He saw Julian Croft, the CEO of the entire company, and then he saw Elias Vance, the man from the front desk, standing at the head of the room like a king holding court. The reality of his colossal mistake began to dawn on him. "Mr. Finch." Croft spat, his voice laced with venom. "This man, Mr. Elias Vance, is the CEO of Nexus Innovations. Do you recognize him?" Finch's blood ran cold. He could only nod, his throat too dry to speak. "Due to your gross misconduct and your complete failure to represent the values of this company, your employment is terminated. Effective immediately," Croft declared loudly, for all to hear. "Get him out of here." Finch stood there, utterly broken, as security guards gently but firmly led him from the room. He was a scapegoat, fired in the most humiliating way possible, but Elias knew it changed nothing. Firing the symptom would not cure the disease. He watched the pathetic spectacle play out, then turned his attention back to the room. "As I was saying," he continued, as if uninterrupted, "Nexus Innovations will not be moving forward with this acquisition. We will not reward a culture of exclusion. We will not invest in a foundation of rot." With that, he and Amina turned and walked out of the conference room. They didn't run, they walked with a deliberate, resolute pace, leaving behind them a scene of total corporate chaos. The news hit the financial world like a shockwave. Before Elias and Amina had even reached the hotel lobby, phones were buzzing. A junior banker in the room, seeing his bonus evaporate, had already leaked the news to a contact at a major financial news outlet. "Nexus CEO Elias Vance Kalis 3.8 BCR Freelance Giamangaro CITU CLTUS ISUS." By the time Elias stepped out of the hotel, the headline was on every screen from Wall Street to London to Tokyo. Croft Enterprises stock, which had surged in anticipation of the deal, went into freefall. In pre-market trading, it plummeted by 30%, erasing over $1 billion of shareholder value in minutes. The quiet, unassuming man in the hoodie had not just rejected a deal. He had passed a judgment, and the market was enforcing the sentence. Alistair Finch had lost his job. Julian Croft was about to lose his empire. The aftermath was swift and brutal. Julian Croft's desperate act of firing Alistair Finch did nothing to stem the bleeding. In the hours that followed the disastrous meeting, Croft Enterprises became the biggest story in the financial world, and the reason was not a missed earnings report, but a catastrophic failure of character. The board of directors, facing shareholder lawsuits and a brand in utter ruin, convened an emergency meeting. Before the market opened the next day, Julian Croft was forced to resign. Elias Vance did not gloat. There was no victory lap. The press conference he had instructed Amina to book was not a celebration of his rival's demise. It was a statement of principle. Standing before a packed room of reporters in the Excelsior Grand's own ballroom, Elias laid out his case with cold, undeniable logic. "We did not walk away from this deal because of a single employee's rude behavior," he began, his voice calm and steady. "That was merely a symptom of a much deeper disease. We walked away because our due diligence, prompted by that incident, revealed a corporate culture that is fundamentally at odds with the future we want to build. A company that systematically devalues any group of human beings is a company that is structurally unsound. Its brand is a lie, and its value is an illusion." He didn't mention the specifics of his own humiliation. He didn't need to. He framed the entire event as a business decision, a new form of analysis he called cultural due diligence. "For too long," he continued, We have measured the worth of a company in spreadsheets and stock prices alone. But a company's culture, how it treats its people, all of its people, from the customer to the janitor to the CEO, is its single greatest asset or its most crippling liability. Nexus Innovations will only invest in companies that understand that. Integrity is not a liability to be managed. It is the bedrock of sustainable value. His speech was a paradigm shift. The phrases, cultural due diligence, and moral bankruptcy echoed across news channels and business schools. Elias Vance had not just canceled a deal, he had introduced a new, powerful metric into the calculus of corporate valuation. He had forced a global conversation about the tangible cost of prejudice. In the weeks that followed, the ripple effects continued. Other companies began quietly reviewing their own internal policies, suddenly terrified of a Vance moment. Activist investors started asking pointed questions about HR complaints and customer satisfaction data during shareholder meetings. A new standard was being set, forged in the public humiliation of Croft Enterprises. Back in his own office, overlooking the New York skyline, Elias felt a sense of quiet satisfaction. The world saw a ruthless CEO who had torpedoed a multi-billion-dollar deal. But he and Amina knew the truth. He had simply refused to buy a broken thing. Amina entered his office, holding a tablet. "The analysts are calling it the Vance Doctrine," she said with a small smile. "They're scrambling to create metrics for corporate culture." "They can try," Elias said, looking out the window. "But it's simpler than that. It's about whether you see people as assets to be valued or liabilities to be managed." He turned to her. "Forget about the big fish for a while. I want you to find me a new acquisition target. Something smaller, hungrier. A company working on something truly innovative, with a leadership team that puts its people first. I don't care if they're barely profitable. We're not just buying technology, we're investing in a better way of doing business." Amina nodded, her eyes bright with purpose. "I've already got a list." Elias looked out at the city, at the endless towers of commerce and capital. For the first time in a long time, he felt a sense of genuine optimism. They hadn't just dodged a bullet. They had fired a shot of their own, a warning shot across the bow of an old and corrupt system. The world was changing, and he would ensure Nexus Innovations was on the right side of that change, building a future where a person's worth was never again determined by the color of their skin or the card in their wallet. Thank you for watching this story unfold. If the message of holding power accountable and valuing integrity over image resonates with you, let us know in the comments below. What did you think of Elias Vance's decision? Don't forget to like this video if you found the conclusion satisfying, and subscribe to the channel for more stories about justice and decisive action. Your engagement helps us create more content that matters.